So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues, and thank you for joining us today for this event, which marks the launch of the 2021-2025 Strategic Plan for the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action, an ambitious strategy which seeks to put children and their protection at the center of humanitarian action. My name is Audrey Bollier, co-coordinator of the Alliance, and I will be your host today. Before we start, may I kindly ask you to write in the chat your name, your organization, and where you are joining us from. You will not be able to unmute yourself during the event, but you can still share thoughts or comments in the chat box. We would really like it if you could share your thoughts and ideas on what putting children at the heart of humanitarian action means to you. Do not hesitate to do that throughout the event. We will have interpretation in French, Spanish, Arabic available throughout the event. To use the interpretation function on Zoom, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom panel and select the language in which you prefer to listen. Later, during today's presentation, we will have two speakers presenting in French. So this means that if you would like to hear the whole event in English, please select the English interpretation option. For those who are bilingual in English and French, you do not need to make a selection. Again, for interpretation in French, Spanish, and Arabic, please select your preferred language by clicking on the icon which look like a globe at the bottom of your Zoom panel. For English speakers who wish to listen the whole presentation in English, please select the English interpretation option. You can follow the instruction in the chat box. We are delighted to welcome such a wide range of participants from all around the world today, from member states, donor agencies, international NGOs, and especially local and national organizations to this important event. Based on the registration number, as of this morning, we should have representatives from 116 different countries. This broad and varied participation is testament that the protection of children is everybody's responsibility and everybody has a role to play in it. We will be together for the next hour, and we will have the immense honor to hear inspiring remarks from high-level speakers, as well as 4 representatives from national organizations working on the front lines of humanitarian action in DRC, Syria, and Turkey. These represent 4 of the 104 national organizations that make up 63% of the Alliance membership. Now, with no further delay, I am very pleased to welcome Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Norway, representative of Norway to the UN and other international organizations in Geneva, Mrs. Tine Moore-Smith, for her opening remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants. I am delighted to welcome you here today for the launch of the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action Strategic Plan 2021 to 2025. This year, we mark the 25th anniversary of the UN mandate on children and armed conflict. As a current member of the Security Council, Norway aims to make child protection a central issue on the Council's agenda. We are committed to ensuring that the UN mandate on children and armed conflict remains robust for as long as children are affected by armed conflict. Still, the Secretary General's annual report on children and armed conflict this year clearly showed how children continue to bear the brunt of brutality in war. The COVID-19 pandemic has continued to aggravate an already vulnerable protection environment for children in many contexts, but particularly for conflict-affected children, including those living in extreme poverty, in internally displaced and refugee camps, and in detention. Girls were usually the first to drop out of school and the last to return, if they returned at all. The importance of placing children and their protection at the heart of all humanitarian and human rights action is the backdrop for today's event. We must collectively work to ensure that children are actively and meaningfully engaged throughout all humanitarian response. The Alliance strategy, which will be presented here today, provides a timely, relevant, concrete and compelling entry point for us to collectively address the urgent protection needs of children and to ensure all humanitarian action has children at the center. As chair of the Security Council's Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict, Norway has taken on particular responsibility for this issue. One of our main objectives is to ensure that UN country and reporting teams have sufficient resources to discover and verify abuses against children. Save the Children launched earlier this year the very first analysis of the risk of sexual violence against children living in conflict in the time span between 1990 and 2019. We know that rape and sexual violence can be particularly difficult to verify and is characterized by underreporting. The report underlines the scale, the gravity, and the urgency of addressing sexual violence against children in armed conflict. The responsibility to ensure children are safe from harm rests with us as donors, on the UN, on states, the humanitarian community, researchers, and on civil society. In fact, on all of us present here today. As a humanitarian donor, we have taken due note of recommendations to boost services and programs and to help address root causes of harm towards preventing negative child protection outcomes. We need to engage our partner organizations, including national and local partners, on protection of children. The report by Special Representative Mrs. Gamba to the General Assembly in July stated that the violation with the greatest increase in 2020 was the abduction of children, which increased by 90%. Roughly half of the abduction incidents were attributed to armed groups in a few countries. This means that we need to discuss very concrete actions, and we must be willing to address the perpetrators and hold them accountable, whether they are non-state armed groups, military forces, or peacekeepers. Norway provides financial support to organizations like Geneva Call, who engage directly with non-state armed groups and seek to commit them to standards of humanitarian norms and principles, and to protection of civilians. The Safe Schools Declaration is a clear entry point for dialogue on protection of children. It focuses on the role of schools as no-go areas for military groups or forces, the right for children to a safe space and to an education. The declaration has become a strong instrument to protect children in conflict settings by facilitating greater collaboration between education and child protection actors. And it is now endorsed by 112 states. I would like to thank all of you again for joining us today. We hope that this event will provide an opportunity for you to reflect on your own roles in making children central to the humanitarian agenda. Thank you so much, and over to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your inspiring words and for being here with us today. I am now very pleased to welcome our next speaker, Mrs. Gillian Triggs, Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, UNHCR. Mrs. Triggs, thank you for making the time to be with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Audrey, and thank you, Ambassador Mosh-Smith. It's wonderful to be part of this call or clarion call to action for children, for their centrality and for protection. So thank you for including us, and welcome and greetings from all my colleagues at the UN Refugee Agency. Can I say that, of course, children are at the center of our humanitarian action, but all too often their needs and voices and their potential remain rather invisible and overlooked. And perhaps this is a rather strange thing to say, but 50% of those displaced by conflict and violence are children. But we tend to use the language of displaced people, of refugees, asylum seekers, stateless people. Perhaps we don't always emphasize the critical point that at least 50%, and in many displaced situations, significantly more, even 60 or 65%, are in fact children and youths. And perhaps when the ambassadors suggest we needed to reflect a little on ourselves, I think one lesson that I would like to take away is that we do need to make the work we do and that others of you do for children more visible. And I think that it tends not to be. It is, of course, a huge challenge for children. We have 82.4 million displaced people globally. And in the last 2 years, it's estimated that more than 1 million children were born as refugees outside the country of their origins or their parents' origins. And this exposes them not only to the obvious risks of being on the move in highly dangerous, vulnerable environments, but it also very often means that they are not registered, their births are not registered, and they become part of the next generation of stateless children. So I think we need to remember this. But every day we are aware at the UN Refugee Agency that globally, children, families, communities, the international and national civil societies and governments are trying to make a difference for children's lives, even in the most challenging and difficult of environments. Then there are strategies for transforming, of course, the vision of the Alliance, which we support very strongly, into concrete action. And that, I think, is the challenge. It always is the challenge, of course, in protecting fundamental rights. And that is that we have the laws, we have the policies, we have the vision, but the Alliance is important in ensuring that we have concrete actions on the ground. And that is really why we find it so important to support the actors and local communities who are able to deliver protection more effectively. It's been one of the silver linings of the COVID conflict that we have really seen in practice why it's so critical for us to support local communities, because they stay and deliver, as of course the Secretary General has asked us all to do. They don't go away when the money runs out. They stay and they support the communities that they serve, and in particular children. There are two elements of the strategy for the Alliance that I'd like to highlight. One being making child protection everyone's business, and the second being to put children and their families and local communities at the center of all of our work to protect children. So with regard to the first, making protection everyone's business, I think we are very aware that we now need to work together. It's perhaps a cliche, it's said too often, but we know that we cannot do this work unilaterally. We can't do it alone, but together we are enormously powerful. The UNHCR has an age, gender diversity policy and a community-based protection approach. And that in particular, of course, emphasizes the work of or the needs in relation to children. The risks for children are multifaceted, and we can best protect them when the entire humanitarian community comes together. So it might be that schools need to be protected and made safe places for children. Families need to be given economic support if they in turn are to be able to protect their children, to stop children being vulnerable to child labor, to early marriage, or even in extreme cases to families feeling that they must sell, particularly, of course, young girls, to other families in order to finance their ability to pay for food, simply to keep their families together. And we're seeing this reported in very worrying numbers in Afghanistan as a more recent example. So that we know that the communities can be effective in making neighborhoods safer for children, and we have to ensure that we make the plight of children more visible. We, for example, do quite a lot of work, and along with others in Syria, with regard to child labor. working with child protection actors to reduce the exposure of children to harmful exploitative labor work. And that's done through the private sector, government bodies, of course, NGOs, through educational institutions, through cash, which is increasingly important, and through access to livelihoods. But all of these as being ways that will protect a child from vulnerability to going into the labor workforce. But these perhaps are exceptions in the sense that we don't always have programs of this kind, and they're certainly not visible. So some form of scaling up, systematization, but also advocacy to make clear that working together, we can be so much more effective. So the second point that I wanted to mention was, again, it's the notion of centrality of children, but the center, putting children at the center of all our work, using families, communities, and local actors. And it is critically important that we must work with local actors as equal partners and experts, not as paid implementators, contractors, or people as recipients of capacity building, but that they are, we engage with them respectfully as equal partners and as experts. We also would like to see a much more nuanced understanding of communities and local actors to identify and partner as allies, and those that share our goals and commitments to putting the protection of children at the center of the humanitarian response. So finally, then, we would like to hold ourselves accountable to children for their protection. And I think the accountability feedback loop is something that's of growing importance to us at UNHCR as we try to set up mechanisms for that accountability. And if I can say, I've recently returned from Niger, one of the poorest countries in the world, with many thousands of children at very serious risk. But in some of our operations in Niger, we now have quite effective call centers where complaints and concerns can be expressed, and where we are bound, and we bind ourselves to respond to each and every one of those statements of concern. And we'd like to see that scaled up in many more of our operations. And it gives an opportunity for children as well to be able to have their voices heard and to explain the plight in which they find themselves in, mostly, of course, through conflict, as the ambassador has pointed out. So we support the Clarion call. We support everybody to come together to seek these transformative strategies to protect these children from the risks and vulnerability that they face, particularly, of course, from our point of view at the UN Refugee Agency, those children who are on the move, who are displaced within their own country or externally, but also, of course, all children who, for one reason or another, particularly as a consequence of COVID, have found themselves to be in precarious and vulnerable positions. So thank you all, and thank you very much to the Alliance for this initiative. Back to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Mrs. Triggs, for these important remarks. Always a pleasure to have you, and we will now let you go. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Now, time has come to dive into the Alliance strategic plan. And before giving the floor to Mr. Hani Mansourian, the co-coordinator of the Alliance, for a brief introduction of the strategic plan, we wanted to share this video with you.
What a powerful call to action this idea of putting children at the center is. In concrete terms, we're talking about children's participation in all aspects of the way that we do humanitarian action, in the assessment, in the design, in the monitoring, in the metrics. And all too often, children are present in description of a humanitarian situation, but not central in the action that addresses that humanitarian crisis.
So the centrality of protection has been an obligation and a requirement for donors for over a decade. But as is being examined in the IASC review, much more is needed to bring it to life and deliver it. And what is that? It's that protection is at the heart of humanitarian action and its purpose. And it's not a poor cousin. It's at the heart of the family and central to its action.
For example, if we look at the food security sector that would go to a village and count if there are enough calories on the tables, we have to see what's also happening under the table. Do we have enough food on the table because children are working in a horrific condition? Do we have food on the table because kids had to be dropped out of school to be able to put food on the table? Do we have food on the table because a girl was married off at the age of 10 and 11 for a certain price that is allowing food? So when you are doing a food intervention with children at the center and with protection at the center, you have to look at the broader impact.
We will now have the great pleasure to hear from Mr. Hani Mansourian, the co-coordinator of the Alliance, for a brief introduction of the strategic plan. Hani, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Audrey. If you can go to the next slide, please. Madam Ambassador, Ms. Trix, thank you very much for your important contributions and for setting the scene for the launch of this important document. Your interventions presented a very strong argument of why centrality of children and their protection is critical for a more humane and principled humanitarian action. As everyone saw in the video that was just aired, the strategic plan is comprised of an overarching goal and 4 strategic priorities. Of course, the overarching goal, as the video very nicely put, is on centrality of children and their protection. And we would like to see that being recognized and prioritized as essential and life-saving across the humanitarian system. I will be talking very briefly about the 4 different strategic priorities, and of course the climate looking ahead element of our strategy. Next slide, please. So on accountability, you will see that the goal that we have is that all humanitarian programs to be accountable to children and ensure their meaningful and equitable participation. Next slide, please. I won't read all the objectives because I'm sure everyone is very keen to read the document itself and go into the details. But what I wanted to say about accountability is that it has been on the agenda of the humanitarian action for quite a long time now. While some progress has been made on this front, it remains one of those areas that I don't believe we can be really proud of what we have achieved. Now, within the whole topic of accountability, the element or the part related to children is even farther behind in terms of real change. And that also relates to the issue of child participation. Sorry, there's someone who's on mute. On the right to participation, which we have chosen to put as a component of accountability, mostly because there's no accountability without participation, not that they're the same thing. The CP sector has made some progress on the issue of participation, but our consultations during this strategy development showed that we're still very far from where we would like to be. We at the Alliance would like to join forces with all of you to move the needle on these two fronts in a more meaningful way. So please join us on that. Next slide, please. The next element or the strategic priority is localization. We would like to see the child protection sector transform its ways of working, rooted in the sharing of capacity, expertise, opportunity, and an intentional shift of power and resources to community, local, and national actors. Next slide, please. So on localization, we were very intentional in choosing the term transforming to describe our ambition on this particular priority. We don't believe small changes are going to get us where we need to be on localization anytime soon. Hence the choosing of this particular word. We feel that localization has become a bit of a buzzword, and inadequate progress has been made on it since the Grand Bargain Commitment in 2016. We hope to focus both internally within the Alliance, but as a network, but also externally in our wider sector to make sure that this agenda makes some meaningful gains within at least our sector. Next slide, please. The next strategic priority is on multi-sectoral and integrated programming. The goal of it is to make sure that children's protection and well-being are prioritized within cross-sector collaboration, including multi-sector and integrated programming, and across all humanitarian action. Next slide, please. On this particular priority, it's yet another area where there's a lot of attention on now. We want to make sure that it's not just yet again another trend, but actually make sure that the change happens. And that's why the focus that we see across operational agencies, networks, donors is very welcome, because it basically means that we also have to change our ways of working, meaning breaking the silos that we have been operating in all these years and look at child and family in a more holistic manner. The Alliance has spearheaded the collaboration between child protection and education in emergencies for quite a number of years. We believe we have been able to make a difference through our work on technical collaboration between these two sectors, as well as our advocacy together with our partners like Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies and others. The Child Protection Minimum Standard Working Group of the Alliance has also recently launched a new initiative linked to its Pillar 4, which is on the topic of working across sectors. Next slide, please. And then we come to the topic of prevention. Those of you who may know me, I'm a little bit of a prevention fanatic. So I have a lot to say on this, but because of time, I won't be able to talk much. The goal of this particular strategic priority is that prevention is understood and prioritized as a critical element of child protection across the humanitarian sector. Next slide, please. And yeah, so the Alliance has been a pioneer in putting the primary prevention on the agenda of the child protection and humanitarian action sector. And by primary prevention, we are talking about addressing risk factors of harm at the population level. While it's absolutely necessary to continue responding to the needs of children who have already been harmed, we just cannot end violence against children or end child labor or end recruitment of children into armed forces and groups or end child marriage by only responding to the needs of those that have been harmed. We need to up our games on primary prevention if we want to truly respect the dignity and rights of children. As many of you know, the Alliance has been working on making preventative programming more accessible to humanitarian actors for the past few years. Please join us in this journey that will be long and hopefully not very arduous to make prevention a significant part of humanitarian response. Next slide, please. And of course, climate crisis is a defining crisis of our time. We chose to put it as a looking ahead element in our strategy, which means we're going to explore what us as the humanitarian sector can do in addressing or being part of the solution to the crisis. Just before I close, I wanted to make sure I mention some of the binding elements of the strategy. If you look at the goals and priorities and objectives, you will notice that there are two core elements that bind the whole strategy together like a glue or a thread. And those are child well-being and child rights. The holistic nature of child well-being and the indivisibility of rights both suggest that we have to look at children holistically rather than dividing them into needs and kind of ignore the interconnectedness of it. And this needs to be recognized across our work, as otherwise we won't be able to guarantee their well-being and fulfillment of their rights. Before I hand over to Audrey, I just wanted to mention my appreciation for hundreds of people who contributed to the development of this strategy. We're very proud to be reflecting your views on this document, and we commit to do everything in our power to move them forward. Over to you, Audrey. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Hani. Just a quick note to say that we are aware about the little Arabic technical glitch, and we will sort that out as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience with us. This said, I'm sure now that after that brief introduction of the strategic plan, everyone is eager to learn more and read the strategic plan in depth. And I'm taking the opportunity to remind everyone that you can write in the chat your thought about what the centrality of children and their protection means to you. I am now turning to my dear panelists who have accepted to speak about the strategic plan and what does this mean in their own context. They will address the challenges and opportunities for making children's centrality and protection a reality across the different contexts in which they operate, highlighting the critical role of local and national actors in child protection and humanitarian action. The panel speaks to the undeniable fact that to achieve better protection for children globally, child protection must start locally. They will also share their key recommendation to the global community on what is needed to support local actors on the front lines of humanitarian response. We will have two panelists who will share their experience in French, and we will let you know so you can switch channel for translation. But now time has come to welcome Mrs. Zeynep Turkmen Sandouvak from Nihanji Association, Mr. Jonas Abimana, founder and executive director at Biford, Mr. Simon Ganketa, executive director at Agedica, Mr. Riyad Al-Najem, co-founder and board member and executive officer at Huras Network. Dear Riyad, my first question is for you. What would the humanitarian action look like in your context if children and their protection needs were placed at the center?
Thank you so much, Audrey. So the first thing that comes to my mind is the impact of our actions. We'll start thinking about the impact rather than the delivery of the activities. I was talking to one of my field colleagues and I asked him this question. And he said, the first thing when we achieve this, we are going to collect all branded school bags. And he mentioned the famous blue bag, and we're going to burn them. And at first I didn't get it. And then it hit me. We're thinking about this as a delivery activity rather than thinking about the impact on children. He said, doing this without thinking about children, thinking about the activity itself, we are establishing the narrative of you are a refugee, you are an IDP, and we are causing harm. So once we start putting children at the center of our activities and work, we will prevent this kind of unintentional harm that we do. The second thing that comes to my mind also is the struggle that we face with other sectors when it comes to, and not only implementers, but also donors. When it comes to the mainstreaming of child protection standards and child safeguarding, once we have children at the core of our work, we will stop talking about mainstreaming. We will not have this as a technical term anymore. We are struggling to convince a health donor to employ a child safeguarding or a child protection officer in a hospital. So once we start thinking about children as a core, we will not struggle a lot to include them and their needs in our everyday work. I can go and talk about this topic for several hours, but I know that my time is limited. So back to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Riyad. And yes, it's a vast topic and we have a limited time. But please, can you also tell us what the Alliance can do to support organizations like yours in making the centrality of children and their protection a reality in your context?
So first thing is more coordination between the Alliance and other coordination bodies for other sectors. A great example is the ad hoc committee between INE and the Alliance. It's a great example. But I think we need to start looking for other sectors that are not child-focused and do this effort with them so they can shift their mentality, the way they think about the implementation of activities to make them like more child-focused and put children at the center. The other thing is there is a huge place for advocacy with donors, and it's great that we have like several donors on the call now. We need to start as an alliance advocating with donors to change their policies towards having children at the center of every project or program that they fund. It should be a principle, it should be a criteria. And then they say, we're not going to fund this unless you fulfill this 1, 2, 3 criteria that make sure that children are at the center. And the last thing that all of you talked about, all of my colleagues before me talked about, is the localization. Starting with local NGOs is a great approach. They understand the context. They can reach out for local communities way better than other international maybe organizations that may try to implement another program that is used in another place. So they can start with children from the design of the project, ending with continuous evaluation, and feed all of this into the next programs and projects. So this could be the best place to start with. Back to you, Audrey. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Riyad. And I'm turning now to you, my dear Zeynep. How about you? What would humanitarian action look like in your context if children and their protection needs were placed at the center?
Thank you, Audrey, and greetings to all from Istanbul. In Turkey, many children, especially those belonging to the most disadvantaged groups, are still vulnerable to violence, abuse, exploitation, and neglect despite positive strides. I will try to give some sense how can we deal with these children's situation in the light of the Alliance strategic priorities. The massive influx of refugees over the past decade has placed a heavy burden on the national child protection system, challenging the capacity of authorities and civil society organizations to effectively prevent and respond to child protection risk and violation. Both Turkish host community and refugee children are often at high risk of child protection risks and violations, such as economic exploitation, separation from their families, neglect, violence and abuse, psychological distress, isolation, discrimination, human trafficking, and child marriage. And unfortunately, risks are not limited with these for children. I think you will all agree with me and that these risks are not only valid for Turkish community children, and also for children around the world relatively, right? Additionally, there is the issue of climate risk and climate justice. The Alliance mainly targets these various groups and vulnerable children and their caregivers who are at risk of being left behind due to several protection concerns. Today, we are here to hear about the Alliance's 4 strategic goals, which is fantastic. To more specifically, for instance, we can deal with these risks in the light of Alliance Strategic Priority 2, localization, transforming how child protection works in humanitarian action. And it is certainly really related with the Priority 3, multi-sector and integrated programming and collaboration, means children's protections and well-being are needed to be prioritized within cross-sector collaboration, including multi-sector and integrated programs, and across all humanitarian action. I think that's all from my part in this spot, I can say. Over to Audrey. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you so much, Zeynep. Because of the time, I'm going to now turn to my 2 next speakers. And for doing so, we will now switch to French to be able to speak with Jonas and Simon. So if you would like to hear the English interpretation, please access the English channel. For the participants who would like to hear in French, please stay here in plenary. Mon cher Jonas, vous m'entendez?
Ça va.
Ça va, très bien. Mon cher Jonas, à quoi ressemble la place centrale des enfants et leur protection dans un contexte comme la République démocratique du Congo?
Merci beaucoup, Madame Audrey. Bienvenue à tous les participants. Au fait, la République démocratique du Congo connaît plusieurs risques de protection de l'enfant. Et c'est un pays où vraiment être un enfant, c'est vraiment un problème. Parce que actuellement, le pays est d'abord à sa 3e vague de l'épidémie à virus Ebola. Et aussi la COVID-19 a eu des impacts sur plus de 27 millions d'enfants suite à la fermeture des classes. Mais aussi dans l'est de la RDC, aujourd'hui, le pays compte plus de 120 groupes armés qui sont actifs. Et tout cela crée des conséquences sur le déplacement des milliers de populations, sans oublier des cas de tuerie. Mais il faut aussi savoir que le pays est soumis aussi à des catastrophes naturelles. Par exemple, l'éruption volcanique qui a eu lieu au niveau du Nord Kivu le 22 mai de cette année. Une éruption qui a eu aussi des impacts sur des millions de personnes. Plus de 2 millions de personnes ont été impactées par l'éruption volcanique de Nyiragongo, et parmi lesquels 60% sont des enfants. Mais il reste aussi à savoir que les gouvernements et la communauté humanitaire font des réponses pour soutenir les enfants, mais il y a encore beaucoup de choses à faire. Pour les cas particuliers, l'appui psychosocial reste encore un problème dans la plupart des sites déplacés, mais il faut aussi comprendre que la réinsertion des enfants sortis des groupes armés constitue aussi un contexte particulier pour les cas de la RDC, mais aussi le renforcement des familles par des moyens de subsistance, lesquels familles ont été soumises à des problèmes de déplacement répétitifs, mais aussi avec des catastrophes naturelles, mais aussi les pandémies qui viennent encore aggraver la vulnérabilité de ces familles. Mais dans tout cela, comme nous sommes en train de parler de la centralité de l'enfant dans la protection, je pense que l'enfant doit toujours être consulté, l'enfant doit participer, il doit être soutenu, et aussi les acteurs doivent travailler en coordination. À vous, Audrey.
Merci beaucoup, Jonas, pour ces remarques et réflexions en lien avec votre contexte de travail, qui est la République démocratique du Congo. Et nous allons rester au pays avec maintenant une question pour vous, mon cher Simon. Simon, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, Audrey, je vous entends très bien.
Très bien. Simon, en tant que praticien et passionné dans le travail avec les enfants associés aux forces et aux groupes armés à l'est de la RDC, en quoi ce plan stratégique 2021-2025, lancé officiellement aujourd'hui, pourrait vous aider à améliorer la qualité de vos interventions dans le contexte fragile dans lequel vous travaillez?
Ok, Audrey, merci beaucoup pour la parole. Bonjour à tous, bon après-midi ou bonsoir à tout le monde. En fait, avant d'aborder cette question, j'aimerais d'abord, en tant que membre de l'Alliance, essayer de donner une vision, au fait, de parler un tout petit peu sur la mission de l'Alliance. Donc, l'Alliance, en fait, a pour mission de soutenir les efforts des acteurs humanitaires pour réaliser des interventions de protection de l'enfant qui sont efficaces et de qualité dans les contextes différents. En fait, entrons maintenant dans le contexte de la RDC. En fait, nous travaillons au sud du Sud Kivu, dans la province du Sud Kivu. Et le plan stratégique 2021-2025 constitue pour nous, en fait, un cadre normatif, un outil d'appui, un cadre de référence pour l'élaboration des différents plans de travail élaborés par différents groupes de travail et les groupes spécialisés. Maintenant, en tant que praticien et passionné dans les activités de prévention et de réponse avec les enfants associés aux forces et aux groupes armés, et ensuite membre du comité directeur de l'Alliance, nous avons vraiment un grand rôle à jouer dans le cadre de la matérialisation de ce plan stratégique en fait qu'il soit une réalité palpable. Et alors, et là, nous devons au fait relier ce plan stratégique avec ces quatre les plans stratégiques, les priorités stratégiques 4 et 2, qui parlent respectivement de la prévention et de la localisation, sont pour nous vraiment inspiratrices et constituent en fait les billets d'entrée à bord de ces bateaux intitulés « La place centrale des enfants et de leur protection dans les contextes humanitaires ». Alors, en rapport avec la prévention, que nous considérons comme un idéal normatif qu'il faut absolument atteindre dans le but de contribuer à prévenir l'utilisation et le recrutement d'enfants, mais aussi d'autres abus envers les enfants dans d'autres secteurs comme l'eau, l'hygiène et l'assainissement, la sécurité et les changements climatiques. La prévention est un élément très, très essentiel dans la protection de l'enfant. Comme mentionné si haut, ce plan stratégique lancé officiellement ces jours constitue un cadre de référence pour les différents groupes de travail et les groupes spécialisés qui doivent s'en approprier et l'appliquer dans les différents programmes. Je prends justement l'exemple de l'IRC, qui est membre du Task Force, enfants associés aux forces et aux groupes armés, qui, au fait, dans le souci de rendre efficace la prévention et de renforcer la réintégration des enfants sortis des forces et groupes armés, avait lancé officiellement son programme de parenting. Alors, il a donné des kits de ressources pour la parentalité. Cet outil, en fait, devra nous guider pour rendre efficaces nos interventions. Les Task Force, enfants associés aux forces et aux groupes armés, a fait référence à cet outil pour l'inclure, en fait, dans son plan de travail. C'est un exemple parmi tant d'autres pour rendre ces plans stratégiques une réalité sur le terrain. Il revient, en fait, en lien avec toujours la mission de l'Alliance. Nous avons estimé nécessaire et utile de s'appuyer aussi sur le troisième pilier du standard minimum pour la protection de l'enfant, qui est composé de standards pour développer des stratégies adéquates. Nous devons faire intégrer les 4 niveaux interconnectés. C'est comme les collègues l'ont dit, qu'il faut toujours être multisectoriel pour faire avancer, en fait, la prévention. Et du modèle socio-écologique dans nos différents programmes de protection de l'enfant contribuerait aussi dans l'efficacité et dans la qualité de notre travail. Nous devons aussi noter par rapport à ces plans stratégiques, il y a aussi la localisation qui est une priorité stratégique placée au deuxième niveau. L'Alliance pour la protection de l'enfant, à travers ses membres, est déterminée à faire avancer sur le plan global, national et local la thématique localisation. Je ne vais pas aller très loin. Les panélistes que vous voyez aujourd'hui, au fait, de cet événement, sont tous les acteurs nationaux, si je ne me trompe pas. C'est déjà un exemple révélateur, palpable, une évidence, qui prouve réellement la détermination de l'Alliance à faire bouger ce secteur à travers la mise en œuvre de ce plan stratégique. Vous vous rappellerez aisément que dans les plans stratégiques 2018-2020, la localisation était mentionnée parmi les 3 axes prioritaires. Nous souhaiterions donc, dans un avenir très proche, que dans ce voyage de la mise en œuvre de ce plan stratégique, interpeller les bailleurs de fonds, les donateurs et les ONG internationales et autres personnalités de bonne volonté réellement engagées dans la matérialisation de la localisation, de bien vouloir embarquer les acteurs nationaux, locaux et des communautés dans les mécanismes de transfert de pouvoir, de compétences et de ressources. Nous terminerons notre propos par ce petit rappel de l'objectif de la localisation mentionné dans les plans stratégiques qui stipule les secteurs de la protection de l'enfance transforme sa façon de travailler en partageant les capacités, l'expertise et les opportunités en transformant intentionnellement les pouvoirs et les ressources aux acteurs communautaires, locaux et nationaux. C'est à ce niveau que nous comptons, en ce qui nous concerne, d'apporter notre pierre d'édifice à l'accostage en beauté de notre bateau qui est le plan stratégique 2021-2025. Audrey, j'ai dit et je vous remercie.
C'est nous qui vous remercions, Simon, pour ces réflexions et pour cette belle métaphore du bateau. Nous sommes prêts à embarquer pour ce voyage. We are ready to embark for that great journey. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Sorry we had to make it a little bit shorter than expected, but thank you so much. And I'm now pleased to welcome Mr. Sanjay Wijesekera, Directeur Programme Division UNICEF, to help us wrap up this rich discussion by reflecting on why the Alliance strategy is a clarion call to the wider humanitarian system. Sir, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you to all the colleagues on the call and for the rich discussions that we've been holding and the huge contributions that you make day in, day out for children. Just a few short remarks from my side. I know it'll never kind of do justice to all the wonderful things that we've talked about, but obviously this is there'll be a major follow-up and so on. So we look forward to working with all the colleagues on that and all the partners. It is time to recognize children for who they are, a unique, diverse, and significant group of rights holders with the right to be treated with dignity, the right to be heard, the right to exercise their agency and be actively involved in the programs and decisions that affect their lives, including contributing to their own protection and well-being. The Alliance strategy's Clarion call invokes us to step up and make children and their protection central to all humanitarian, and I would add, non-humanitarian and development programming, to all programming. At UNICEF, we are proud to be the co-lead of the Alliance, and I would like to reiterate our full support for the implementation of this important strategy and all its priorities. Accountability, localization, multi-sector and integrated programming and collaboration and prevention. We also find it very pertinent that the strategy looks ahead at the climate crisis and what it may mean for the child protection sector. And I just got back from South Sudan on Saturday, and we could vividly see the impacts of the climate crisis particularly on children and the protection issues that raises. So as many of you may be aware, UNICEF also recently launched our 2021 to 2030 child protection strategy. And while much of what is in the Alliance strategy aligns with UNICEF's strategy, I would like to highlight prevention in particular. The Alliance has been advocating for investing in prevention in humanitarian action for a number of years now. The advocacy and technical work that the Alliance has done on this topic has been extremely helpful to us and many others who have now made prevention a priority of their own. It is critically important that the Alliance's strategy has a specific pillar dedicated to localization and seeks to transform the way we work. Local actors are key to prevention, where impactful prevention interventions are built on local and indigenous approaches to protecting children, understanding risks and protective factors within communities. Today, we've heard a very powerful call to action from 4 representatives of national organizations working on the front lines of humanitarian response in Turkey, Syria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. With deep understanding and strong ties with crisis-affected communities, local and national organizations are in a unique position to respond to the needs of children in humanitarian settings. So thank you, Riyad, Jonas, Zainab, and Simon for reminding us of this today and for providing concrete recommendations on how we can elevate and support the role of local and national actors in the framework of the Alliance's strategic plan. I also want to recall the important points Ambassador Smith highlighted regarding the unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis on children globally. Ms. Trix also underscored the devastating protection concern for refugees, migrants, and displaced children. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with 3 points. Let us amplify the clarion call for this strategy within our institutions, whether we're delivering, supporting, or funding protection and assistance, to ensure that children and their protection is at the heart of humanitarian action. Secondly, to be successful, we also need to work across humanitarian and development programming and with all sectors. So this cannot be achieved by protection actors alone. And thirdly, local and national organizations are vital to the sustainable protection of children. So this strategy will not become a reality if it is not owned by those delivering services on the front lines. So we as UNICEF look forward to our continued collaboration with the Alliance, its members, supporters, and partners to make the ambitions of the Alliance's strategy a reality for children affected by fragility, crisis, and conflict. So thank you very much for the work you do, and we look forward to partnering with you on this really important agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. And thanks everyone for all the great contributions you made today. Sanjay, I think everyone heard that strong clarion call and the echo that you made. Thank you for that. Audrey, should I close?
Yes, please. We are
okay.
slightly late, but we can close.
Great. We may go 1 or 2 minutes over.
Please stay with us.
Yes, if you can, please stay. If you can't, thank you very much for staying up to the end. I first wanted to say what an inspiring event. Thank you to all the speakers and those that made this very special. We have a clear call to action for all of us. We have to roll up our sleeves, get to work, and make a difference for children who rely on us. And when I say us, I don't mean the Alliance, I mean the collective us, for their protection and well-being. We would like to now invite you to please, my colleagues are going to put a Menti poll in the chat. Please click on the Menti poll and share with us a commitment that at this point you want to make to yourself or to us It's going to be anonymous, on what you're going to do differently going forward to make children more central in humanitarian action. So it's basically just a reflection for yourself, and you put it up there to encourage others to also do more. There's not going to be we will never hold you accountable to it if if that's the fear. So please click on the Menti link and start filling it out. I wanted to give a couple of minutes, but because of lack of time, I'm just going to continue closing. I wanted to not only thank the speakers, but also others that have worked behind the scenes to make this event a success. In particular, I wanted to thank Elspeth Chapman and Kiera Lote, who really worked hard to make this to happen. And also a huge thanks to the interpretation team who helped us make this event more accessible. Among those who made this event very special is also Audrey Bollier, my very own co-coordinator. I name her specifically because sadly, we're going to unfortunately not have Audrey with us starting from next year. So this might be the last external facing Alliance event where Audrey is with us, and she masterfully hosted it as she has done many other events. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank her for all she has done for the past almost 4.5 years for the Alliance and for the sector. The Alliance would not have been where it is without you, Audrey. Thank you. And please feel free to write any messages that you may have for Audrey in the chat. Lastly, join us in this call to action and play your part in putting children at the heart of humanitarian action. We thank you very much for joining us today, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.